folks, let's have a look at Seamus Heaney's really, it's a wonderful poem, Mossbawn. 2 poems in dedication, part 1, Sunlight. And it's just a really interesting poem. I love the economy of language in this poem. I love how he uses language in such a succinct and direct and clever way, but also the richness of the imagery. It's a poem about love. It's a love poem. It's a poem about love. It's about family. Fundamentally, that's what this poem is. But it's also about appreciation. It's about time. It's about the transience of life. How, nothing is permanent. Things that we think will always be there won't. And one of the things that this poem is about is loss. And that's why it's dedicated to Mary Heaney, who was his dad's sister. Sorry if there's one of my neighbours, and I hope you're watching this. The dogs are barking. So apologies if that can be picked up on the mic. So Mary Heaney was his maternal aunt, and she lived with him at the family home. She wasn't married as a child. And this is a poem in which the poet, very typically for Heaney, his poetry is autobiographical. His poetry is, many of the poems are about his family and his personal experience. Now, some of them are about the place he's from. So if you read something like Talonman or I'm trying to think now, what are the other ones? There are poems on the course which are about the society he inhabits rather than his own personal life. But this is one of those very personal poems. The other one I'm thinking is called A Constable Calls. But even those poems are rooted in his own experience. So this is a poem about family. And it's extremely atmospheric. For me, it's a poem of 2 halves. The first half, this section here, is it's evidence of Heaney's command over language, his ability to, provoke a scene, an atmosphere, his use of particular poetic skills. But it's the second half of the poem that I really love, that I think has meaning to Heaney, as a writer, but also to all of us, because it addresses themes which are utterly relatable and, for me anyway, universal. Now, I'm after making a mistake there, sorry folks. So as I say, it's personal, and when you look at the title of the poem, Mossbawn, as in Mossbawn Sunlight, Mossbawn was the name of his family home. He lived on a farm in rural County Derry, and the name of the farm, and still there today, is Mossbawn. And he's looking back on this place, and he's just remembering it as a place which was warm and where he felt comfortable. There was a sunlit absence. The helmeted pump in the yard heated its iron. Water honeyed in the slung bucket, and the sun stood like a griddle cooling against the wall of each long afternoon. Absolutely beautiful atmospheric writing. He's just capturing like a really warm summer's day. The sibilance, the repetition of the S sound, somehow bringing that languid atmosphere to life. The reference to the water honeying, in other words, the taste of the water in the bucket. There's a well in the yard, kind of changing because of the heat. And he says it's honeyed, so this reference to sweetness and the gustatory sense, the sense of taste, and how we associate sweetness with positivity. There's a sense that this was looking back in this place was a lovely place. And he's thinking about that place as a warm place. The sun is mentioned in the first line. Heat is mentioned in the third line. The sun is mentioned again in the second line of the second stanza. We have this image of, a griddle. A griddle is a cooking implement that's associated with heat. So all of these things are there to be interpreted. But what we get is when he looks back on this place, it feels bright and it feels warm. So this is his childhood. And this is associated with one particular person. And this is the Mary Heaney who is referred to in the dedication. And when he says so, And he says, so her hands scuffled along the bakeboard, over the bakeboard. He's talking about Mary Heaney. I love scuffled because it's onomatopoeic. So he's like bringing us into the kitchen where she was baking, and he's doing that by appealing to our senses. In this case, it's the aural sense. So we have the feeling of being in that place, the heat, that's the haptic sense. We have the taste of the water honeying in the slung bucket, so that's the gustatory sense. We have the sound of her fingers working with the dough and the flour scuffling over the bakeboard. So really immersive descriptive writing. And he says, her hands scuffled over the bakeboard, and the reddening stove, and this is for me the best image in the whole poem, sent its plaque of heat against her where she stood in a flowery apron by the window. Now, see that image of a plaque of heat? Again, that appeals to the haptic sense. If you've ever opened an oven while standing a bit too close to it, you'll understand that wall of, that a plaque of something hard, something that hits you, that plaque of heat coming out, you know, you can't ignore it, that unignorable blast of heat that happens when you open an oven. So he's describing this childhood memory of his aunt baking scones for him, and you know, the oven being open and this surge of heat. But for me, the plaque of heat is one of the best metaphors in all of Heaney's poetry. And what it does is it captures that idea of how easy it is to take people for granted. And that it's only afterwards, maybe after they've gone from our lives, after maybe we've been separated by death, that we look back and we feel this kind of immediate surge of love and appreciation. That, you know, I'm always fighting with my kids because I'm always trying to get them to live in the moment. But of course, that's ridiculous. I'm 50 years old. They're young. They don't want to live. They don't view the world. Young people don't view the world the way older people do most of the time. I'm aware of how transient things are, of how, you know, what a short little ride of life we get. They think life's going to last forever. And I suppose that's a very human thing that Heaney is describing here. So when he has this memory of his aunt baking, he is metaphorically hit by a plaque of heat. And that plaque of heat represents love, appreciation, something which has come almost out of nowhere, like an oven door being opened and being hit by that wall of warm air. And then he describes her in her flowery apron, dusting the goose's wing. He describes her sitting broad-lapped, with whitened nails and measling shins. And you just have to look at those noun-adjective combinations to see one of the defining features of Heaney's poetry. This is a guy who pays attention to detail. And if you look at your paper one video content, when I'm talking about aesthetic language, one of the things that really good descriptive writers do is they just pay attention to little details that don't appear to be important. But the addition of those details, if done with economy and if done with thought or careful thought, can have the same impact as a painter's stroke of a brush across a canvas. Each stroke on its own seemingly unimportant, but when combined with all of the other little strokes, when one detail is combined with all the other little details, suddenly the image pops and becomes clear. So we see his aunt. We see her hands covered in flour as she scuffles and her nails are whitened because of the flour. We see that she's slightly overweight because she has a broad lap. We see that she's wearing an apron and that it's flowery. We see that the skin in her legs is patchy because it's measling. And what you have to understand is why Heaney is taking the time to describe her in such great detail. This is a feature of his poetry, the pen portrait, the use of words to paint vivid pictures of characters. And why is he describing her in this way? Because she was important. Because this poem is a poem in which he's recording her and the positive role that she played in his life. just baking those scones, being there, doing those things for the family was an act of love. And he doesn't want to remember her any way other than how she was, with her measling shins and her broad lap and her whitened nails, because all of that was combined to make her who she was. And to him, she's beautiful because she represents love. And isn't that fantastic? Always makes me want to go and hug somebody. If anybody in my family heard that, they'd run away. And then we get, and this is what's magnificent about Heaney, I mentioned at the start, the economy of language. Then we get this unbelievable moment where he says, here is a space again. A space. What does he mean by that? He means, as he writes the poem, a space to think. Because life is so busy and we're caught up in all our daily demands of, everyday life and routine that we forget things. But he says he's taken the time here. Here is a space again. The scone rising to the tick of 2 clocks. And again, you just go, Jesus Christ, Seamus. What a talented human being. Why 2 clocks? First of all, do you hear the alliteration of the T to the tick of 2 clocks? Beautiful. The word tick is onomatopoeic, so you can hear the sound. But why 2 clocks? Did you think they had 2 clocks in the kitchen? I don't think so. I think one of the clocks is the clock in the kitchen, as the aunt is watching it to make sure that she takes the scones out in time. But the other clock is that clock that's always with us. That clock we have an internal one. Just do that and you'll feel your heartbeat, because we are transient. Life is not permanent. It is fragile. And there is Heaney's awareness of that fact. That when he looks back on his aunt and when he writes this poem, his aunt is no longer alive. He's thinking about that idea of appreciating what we have. And of course, the reality is that we often don't appreciate it when we have it. The reality is that we often take these little everyday miracles that populate our lives. And the number one of those miracles is the love that we have from our family, that we often don't take those things for granted. And it's only afterwards that we really reflect on them, as he does here. And that's why he ends the poem with one of those, throw it up in the air and just knock it out the park and respect you, Seamus Heaney, with this brilliant ending. And here is love, like a tinsmith's scoop, sunk past its gleam in the meal bin. It's a simile, it's a metaphor, it's an example of figurative language, it's complex, it's an example of juxtaposition or contrast, the profound and the banal, put side by side to make an important point. It's magnificent writing. What's a tinsmith scoop? It's a little measuring spoon that you use when you're baking to make sure you have the right amount of flour, the right amount of whatever you're putting in. It's one of those things that, it's very handy. And the only time that you appreciate it is when it's not there anymore. So it's a useful little thing, but you take it for granted. It's in the meal bin, it's in the little container where the ingredients are, and you just expect it's always going to be there. That's his aunt. That's all of those people that you love. That's all of those people that we all love. We take them for granted. We think they're always going to be there. We don't appreciate what they add to our lives until they're gone. And that is a brilliant, thought-provoking. I first read this poem when I was about, 21. And I thought I got it then. I'm 50 now, and I really feel I get it. Because it's about the fact that life is short. It's about the fact that we are surrounded on a daily basis, most of us, by little miracles that enhance our lives. And it's about the fact that we probably don't take enough time to appreciate them. And in this poem, which is dedicated to Mossbawn, Heaney is remembering his Aunt Mary, which is why the poem is dedicated, it says, for Mary Heaney. What a great poem. Love it. Seamus Heaney's Mossbawn Sunlight number 1, Sunlight.